boutique, her manicured hands clutching the hem of my designer trench coat. "Please, Sophia," she sobbed, her tears ruining her expensive makeup. "Just let us see him once. We know we ruined everything 20 years ago, but he's our only grandson. We will give him our entire estate, the family business, everything. Just tell us where he is." My father stood behind her, his proud shoulders slumped, nodding desperately in agreement. They looked at me with eyes full of dynamic hope, completely convinced they were about to mend our broken family line. I slowly leaned down, pried her fingers off my coat, and looked them both dead in the eye. A cold smile spread across my face as I whispered the truth that would utterly shatter their world. He doesn't exist. The heavy glass doors of my boutique usually bring in the city's elite, but today, they let in the two ghosts I've spent 20 years running from. I am Sophia, and I am 36 years old. Looking at me now, standing tall, polished, and holding myself with absolute confidence, you would see the exact image of a self-made woman who has conquered every obstacle in her path. But beneath this designer blouse lies a scar that goes back 2 decades. 20 years ago, I wasn't an entrepreneur. I was just a terrified 16-year-old girl standing in a dimly lit bathroom in the middle of winter, staring at a positive pregnancy test. When I finally gathered the courage to tell my hyper-religious, wealthy parents, there was no comfort, no embrace. My father looked at me with cold disgust, while my mother silently packed my belongings into 2 plastic trash bags. They opened the front door, threw my bags onto the wet driveway, and told me I was no longer their daughter. They chose their high society reputation over their own flesh and blood, completely erasing me from the family dynamic before slamming the door in my face. I was left alone in the dark, shivering in the freezing rain, with absolutely nowhere to go. Before I tell you how city you are watching from, I want to see how far the story of survival has truly reached. That freezing rain didn't just soak through my thin jacket. It washed away every ounce of childhood innocence I had left. At 16, the world is supposed to be about high school drama and planning for prom, but my new reality was raw survival. I walked for hours that first night, dragging those heavy plastic trash bags until the plastic tore open, scattering my few remaining clothes onto the dirty sidewalk. I ended up crouching in the doorway of a closed convenience store, shivering so violently that my teeth ached. The fear was a physical weight pressing down on my chest, reminding me with every breath that I was completely, utterly alone. The next morning, survival instinct took over. I couldn't afford to sit and cry. I found a local youth shelter that offered a warm bed and a safety net, but I knew I couldn't rely on charity forever. To feed myself and save for future, I took on 2 exhausting under-the-table jobs. Before my peers even woke up for school, I was scrubbing grease off kitchen floors at a local diner, and late at night, I was sweeping up wood shavings in a dusty warehouse. My hands grew calloused, my back constantly ached, and exhaustion became my shadow. During those endless, brutal months, a fierce transformation happened inside me. The scared, broken teenager who begged for her parents' love died on that wet pavement. In her place, a resilient fighter was born. Every drop of sweat and every insult I endured from demanding bosses became fuel. I looked at the glittering downtown skyline and made a silent, unshakable vow to myself. I would build a life so magnificent that I would never have to look back at the toxic people who threw me away. But while my outer shell was growing tougher by the day, my body was carrying a heavy secret. I was doing everything I could to stay healthy, eating whatever nutritious food I could scrape together, and walking miles to a free clinic across town for basic checkups. The nurses there were kind, providing the only real warmth I had experienced since being cast out. I began to picture a future where it would just be me and my baby against the world. I drew strength from that thought, convincing myself that I could be both a mother and a provider, creating the loving home I had been cruelly denied. Then, during my 5th month, the sky fell again. It started as a sharp, sudden pain while I was working a late shift at the diner. By the time I made it to the clinic, the quiet medical emergency was already unfolding. The look on the doctor's face told me everything before he even spoke. The stress, the malnutrition, and the sheer physical exhaustion of my survival had taken their toll. I lost the pregnancy that night in a cold, sterile room, with no one to hold my hand. The grief was a silent, crushing wave, but devastating loss deep inside my heart, letting it harden into something unbreakable. I didn't let the tragedy destroy me. Instead, I turned that profound pain into an unshakable driving force. If I was going to be entirely alone in this world, I was going to build an empire out of nothing. With my grief locked away, I poured every ounce of my remaining energy into education and ambition. I refused to let my story end in that clinic. I enrolled in night school, surviving on 4 hours of sleep a week, determined to outstudy everyone who had the luxury of a stable home. My relentless focus paid off when I secured a full academic scholarship to a top-tier university. While other students went to parties, I studied the mechanics of the luxury fashion and design industry, learning how empires were built, marketed, and sustained. I wasn't just looking for a job, I was building a launchpad. After graduation, I entered the cutthroat world of high-end fashion. I started at the absolute bottom, but within 5 years, my sharp instincts and work ethic made me indispensable. I saved every penny, negotiated brilliant deals, and eventually took the ultimate gamble by launching my own elite brand. The risk paid off spectacularly. Today, my multi-million-dollar business occupies a prime location downtown, and my name has become entirely synonymous with elite success in the city. I completely transformed myself from that shivering, discarded girl on the pavement into the polished, powerful 36-year-old woman you see right now. I built a fortress of wealth and reputation that no one could ever tear down. My parents had cast me out to protect their precious high society standing, completely unaware that the daughter they threw away would eventually rise to eclipse them in every imaginable way, standing at the very peak of the industry they so deeply envied. But success on that scale leaves a massive blueprint, and eventually, the rumor mill started spinning. While I was busy scaling my business, my parents were facing the exact opposite fate. Karma has a funny way of balancing the scales, and over the last decade, a series of disastrous investments and failed business ventures had completely bled their inheritance dry. They were staring down the barrel of social ruin, with no remaining heirs left to salvage their precious family line. That was when they caught wind of my massive success. But greed makes people blind, and they completely misinterpreted a major public relations feature about my newly launched foundation for underprivileged youth. The article mentioned a young man who had excelled under my personal mentorship, but my parents' desperate minds twisted the facts. They mistakenly believed I had raised a secret, 20-year-old son in the lap of luxury, a grandson who could now inherit what was left of their name and fix their broken legacy. The thought of an adult grandson, rich and successful, sparked a manic desperation in them. They didn't care about making amends for throwing me out into the freezing rain. They only cared about what that imaginary boy could do for their social standing. They hired lawyers, pressured old acquaintances, and began aggressively tracking my daily movements, desperately plotting how they could force their way back into my life. They had absolutely no idea they were hunting a ghost. The heavy glass doors of my high-end boutique rattled as my parents unexpectedly marched inside, setting up the exact scene I had spent 20 years preparing for. The air in the room instantly froze. Sydney and Edwin might have worn false masks of parental affection, but their frantic eyes betrayed their true intentions. My mother fell to her knees right there on the polished marble floor, her manicured hands clutching the hem of my designer trench coat as she began to sob hysterically, begging for forgiveness. My father stood right behind her, his once proud shoulders completely slumped as he nodded desperately in agreement. They began pouring out a torrent of promises, attempting to use what was left of their wealth, their crumbling inheritance, and a sickening wave of synthetic sympathy to bargain for access to their grandson. They claimed they wanted to give him the family business, their entire estate, and everything they owned, completely convinced that this imaginary boy was the key to mending our broken family line. I stood completely still, watching their theatrical performance with cold detachment. It was painfully clear that they hadn't changed at all. They didn't care about the 16-year-old girl they left shivering in the rain, nor did they care about my actual well-being. They were just drowning in debt desperately trying to manipulate a grieving daughter to save their social standing. The pacing of the room slowed down to a crawl as I slowly leaned down, pried my mother's trembling fingers off my coat, and looked them both dead in the eye, ready to shatter their delusion. A cold smile spread across my face as I looked at their hopeful, desperate expressions. "You want to meet your grandson?" I asked, my voice cutting through the quiet room like ice. "The truth is, he doesn't exist. 20 years ago, the sheer stress, hunger, and physical trauma of being thrown onto the streets by my own parents caused a medical emergency. I lost that pregnancy in a free clinic while you two were busy attending high society parties." The absolute horror and crushing defeat that washed over their faces was instant. My mother gasped, collapsing back onto the floor, while my father stared at me in stunned, silent shock. The phantom heir they had pinned all their financial and social hopes on was nothing but a consequence of their own cruelty. They had destroyed their own legacy the exact moment they locked that front door on a pregnant 16-year-old girl. I didn't waste another second on their tears. I signaled my security guards, who promptly escorted them out of my boutique and out of my life forever. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Was leaving two other favorite stories on the screen that will definitely